Hi, everyone. Welcome to Arc Salon number 4. Today, we're joined by Brandon Norgaard on a presentation titled Archdisciplinarity in the Meta Crisis. Brandon is the founder of the project called Enlightened Worldview and a prominent speaker in meta-modern circles on all sorts of topics. But I'll just hand it off to you, Brandon, and allow you to maybe say a little bit more about yourself, begin your presentation, and then after you're done with that, we'll do the kind of standard Salon thing and move into some Q&A and discussion. So yeah, take it away.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And well, gosh, what else about me? I am from Northern California, and I am interested in a lot of these highly theoretical frameworks and also their practical application in trying to address these large-scale challenges. I'm also interested in working at the local level, and there, like just for example, there could be some sort of a way in which we all do local experiments and try to figure out how to auto-poetically make large-scale change from that. But today I'm not going to be talking about my own project in particular. What I'm doing here today, what I'm presenting on, is mostly coming from the recent Foundations of Archdisciplinarity paper. So there is a lot in that paper about what is Archdisciplinarity and also how it can be applied. I'll probably go ahead and start this presentation and just a moment here. All right. You guys can see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for joining. Okay, so addressing the meta crisis, this is bringing the big picture to everyday life through the practical application of archdisciplinarity. And what we're going to do here, first, we're going to talk about the relation between research, theory, and practice. I'm going to introduce what is the meta crisis, and a lot of you guys are already familiar with that term, but I just to make sure everybody understands that as far as we understand it. And we're going to talk about theories of everything and their pros and cons. We're going to talk about how archdisciplinarity can help us in addressing these greatest challenges of our time, and also what is the Archdisciplinary Research Center doing. And okay, so what is the optimal relationship between research, theory, and practice? So research can expand the bounds of human knowledge, and theories can help us understand the world around us. But newly explored intellectual territory, it usually leads to practical application, although not necessarily right away. So what this essentially means is theories and disciplines of study have many purposes, including expanding the bounds of human knowledge and to satisfy pure curiosity. Ultimately, most research should somehow contribute to addressing real-world problems and challenges. So it's not just, people in an ivory tower, doing all kinds of research, for their own benefit or whatever, or for no practical application. Okay, so the practical application of original groundbreaking research is not always known at the time when it's being conducted. So I think I'm saying this in order to make clear that I'm going to offer a connection between the research and theory that is being done within ARC. Although even if I'm not able to connect those dots, you can envision that there's probably going to be something like that. So whenever people are exploring new intellectual territory, it is likely that there's going to be a practical application to this work found in within the next few years. Even if we don't have all the details figured out for how that's going to happen, you can at least see that that connection. Okay, so what is the meta crisis? There are several interdependent and interrelated crises that we are facing simultaneously, which pose an existential threat to human civilization. And this includes rampant ecological degradation, which threatens the viability of our biosphere, and that our political, economic, and educational systems are showing obvious signs of instability and failure. There have been serious breakdowns in our information ecosystems, and otherwise well-intentioned people cannot find a shared sense of purpose and cannot effectively communicate and coordinate with each other toward what should be shared universal goals, such as saving the planet, our biosphere, and our human civilization for further decay and devastation. So the central idea is that our biosphere is facing an ecological emergency, and that we have serious failings in other areas of public life that are preventing us from adequately addressing this emergency. Most notably, our political, sociocultural, economic, and educational systems are all showing very serious failures. And thus we can consider each of these to be a distinct crisis in its own right. These crises are exacerbated by a breakdown in public sense making. So we don't know what to believe from information, the media, various different media outlets. There are distortions within this information ecology, and the core is the so-called meaning crisis, which leads people to confusion and alienation and an inability to find sufficient intelligibility and purpose within their lives. The so-called meta crisis, if viewed from the standpoint of complexity, must be addressed from a systemic perspective, which incorporates elements from economics, ecology, sociology, and many other disciplines in order to develop a solution that is ecologically, economically, and socially sustainable. So far, we have a demonstrated inability to coordinate at a global scale without causing deadly catastrophes or resorting to all-encompassing dystopias. So a lot of people are assessing this at a high level, saying, okay, that there are two likely possibilities that you can see as attractor forces, one of which is chaotic breakdown of our systems that are already showing signs of fray and failure. Another is that in order to address that, some people might want to come in and say, okay, we're going to have more control. We're going to have more centralized control, but that leads to an attractor as well, another dystopic outcome wherein there is this dictatorship. Okay, so we're looking for a third attractor here, but in order to do that, we need to understand what we're talking about. We need to raise consciousness on the meta crisis, or as it's sometimes called, the poly crisis. Maybe that's not exactly the same concept, but the term the poly crisis is somewhat more popular in some circles, like Davos, Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum, you have some wealthy and well-connected people getting together there, and they are now talking about the poly crisis. So that's, I think, one step in the right direction. At least you have these people who are, some of them are really just trying to protect their own turf, but at least there's some sort of public understanding that there are these multiple crises, and they are ultimately interrelated somehow. Okay, so how can we meaningfully address the meta crisis? This is an extremely complex, tangled knot of wicked problems. It is a hyperobject that we cannot really comprehend nor talk about in full detail. So a hyperobject is a real event or phenomenon so vast that it is beyond human comprehension because it is so complex and ever-changing, and we can only glimpse limited perspectives on it, and we have a very difficult time talking about it or having a shared understanding of it, because we all have different perspectives that don't necessarily overlap with each other. So any serious effort would simultaneously require ecological science, psychology, economics, game theory, political science, communication theory, several other disciplines. And any discipline is going to be, any of these disciplines is going to be adjacent to and interwoven with other disciplines, such as how psychology is inherently connected to biology, and also to sociology and anthropology and other social sciences. So we would need to utilize advanced technology in order to make tangible progress as well. So it's not just the scientific side, but it's also essentially the engineering side. Any meaningful progress would require theoretical and applied scientific expertise, and would also advanced engineering expertise, which that's a lot of expertise and a lot of research institutes and universities that would need to coordinate in order for us to meaningfully address the meta crisis. For any complex, large-scale problem, it is essential to go to higher levels of abstraction, to go meta, in order to begin to understand the problem space and the potential solution space. And we do have high-level frameworks that operate on a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary level in order to develop a more holistic and consilient vision of the natural sciences and our relation to it. Hence, we have these frameworks, which I'll get into in the next slide. Although the meta crisis is so complex that going meta is not enough. We need to take it to another level and go arch. All right, so, and can theories of everything address any and all problems? So we have big picture frameworks that supposedly include explanations for everything in existence and every possible phenomenon, large and small. We have integrative metatheories and unification metatheories, and in some cases, these might be considered theories of everything, which are hypothetical, singular, all-encompassing, coherent theoretical frameworks that fully explain and link together all aspects of the universe, or at least try to. Theories of everything include maps that supposedly encompass all disciplines of study and that aim to show how these are related to each other. Since these maps and models are supposed to include everything, can we reliably use them to analyze and address highly complex problems, such as the meta crisis? So let's look at some of the big picture frameworks that are out there. Okay, there are certainly people who want to make tangible progress in addressing these large-scale problems. There are people who are studying and theorizing as much as possible, who are building models to help understand the problem space and the potential solution space of the meta crisis. So here are some examples that have different approaches to understanding the meta crisis, and they have recommended roadmaps for mitigating these crises and making positive impacts in the future. So, and a lot of you guys are familiar with integral theory of Ken Wilber. And so as Integral would say, we are insufficiently developed, both psychologically and socioculturally, and we are not aware of our interiors, our exteriors, individually and collectively, and that we need to certain kinds of integral life practice to develop on multiple lines of maturation. You know, the so-called grow up, wake up, clean up, show up. It's pretty detailed and sophisticated in certain ways. And then we have critical realism of Roy Bhaskar, which is actually started from a more academic standpoint, and it is something that hasn't really caught fire among the rank and file of common people out there. It's a little too academic, but in some ways it's quite sophisticated, more sophisticated than maybe perhaps many of the others on this list. Wherein it would say we don't understand the reality behind appearances, especially those that are sociocultural, and thus we do not understand the dynamic processes through which they change. And we need to use dialectical processes to provide the catalyst for social evolution, so we can protect human rights and the natural environment. So I understand that critical realism kind of started from this look at, okay, what is this, maybe a midpoint between Marxism and capitalism in order to have a liberation. And then it ended up becoming like a theory of everything, right? And then we also have complex thought, which I understand started from ecological studies, so where we tend to think mechanistically, and we have a difficulty understanding ecology and the nuance of complexity, and this thinking has degraded our natural environments. And so thinkers like Edgar Morin would say that we can only live more sustainably if we understand complex, adaptive, biological, and social systems and our evolving relation to them. So more recently, in the last few years, Greg Henriquez formulated the Unified Theory of Knowledge, UTOK, which is centered around psychology, the so-called problem of psychology, and the enlightenment gap, where he's arguing that we are left confused about what is psychology and what is the mind, and the approach that he suggests we take to addressing large-scale problems is to start first have a coherent naturalistic ontology and more clear definitions for scientific terms that are taken for granted, which allow us more effective approaches to psychotherapy, which we can then use to branch into other areas. So Lena Rachel Anderson has Folkbildung 3.0 in her historical analysis. She's identified 2 earlier versions of Folkbildung and also metamodernity, wherein she's saying that our ecological, educational, political, and economic systems are failing, and our culture is degrading through exponential technology. So she saw this a few years ago with the rapid advance of AI, and so she's saying that we need Bildung in order to educate ourselves to grasp the challenges from exponential technologies, globalization, and the overall human impact on our planet. So my way of kind of a shorthand definition for Bildung is self-cultivation, community development, and lifelong learning, all working hand in hand. And there's more nuanced definitions, of course. That's just the easiest 3-part definition that I can offer right now. And then Hansi Freinacht is with 2 books, The Listening Society and Nordic Ideology. And I suppose I didn't want to use the shorthand term Nordic metamodernism, because that seems to also include Lena's work. So I'm just shorthand offering it, the definition, the name of those 2 books there, wherein they explain that our institutions are outdated and failing, and that we lack cognitive capacity to collectively create a better society. And we need to create a deliberately developmental society in which institutions are created to help people develop and to reach their full potential. So it's both based on psychological ego development, but also based on sociocultural development, based on new political institutions. And there's quite a few more. Some of this table here came from in earlier presentations I've done, including at the STOA. There's quite a few more large-scale frameworks and other approaches to the meta crisis. This is just a little bit of a taste here. But if we do look at all-encompassing theories of everything, and not necessarily those that were listed on the previous slide would all be considered theories of everything, but they do seem to cover quite a bit one way or another. Okay, so the problem is that, for one thing, any metatheory, integrative or unification, whatever you want to call it, no matter how comprehensive it attempts to be, inevitably has strengths and shortcomings. And that would depend on the application and depending on the context. These maps might provide enormous explanatory depth, but any such map is inevitably going to be limited in applicability. Some integrated or unification metatheories are better at certain things, such as for complex thought, that might actually be better for environmental sustainability triage and long-term planning. Integral theory, AQUAL, might be better for collective spiritual development, and critical realism might be better at political and economic transformation. And I'm not saying that I'm not making statements in that regard. I'm just giving examples of what possibly could be the case, And so I wouldn't expect any one of those or anything on the previous slide to cover all bases and be all things to all people. So specialists, researchers, activists, and community leaders might at best be well versed in one specific integrative meta theory, but usually unfamiliar with the others. And they might come in contact with people who are specialists in another area, so you might have someone trying to do work on the ground level using critical realism as their toolbox, and then another person that they need to coordinate with is specialist in integral theory or something like that, so any map that attempts to any map that attempts to show the interconnections among a wide range of phenomena, such as consciousness, the cosmos, human society, and foundational physical interactions, will end up implicitly favoring certain approaches to addressing problems. So as the saying goes, the map is not the territory, and the map is inevitably going to be in the complicated domain. Whereas nature is pretty much in the complex domain. So if you guys understand the kind of the distinction between complicated, something that you can probably conceptualize or computer models can fully conceptualize, and you can disassemble them and reassemble them, like a car engine, for example. So complex systems can never really be fully comprehended because they are adapting, they are evolving. They are they stand in a relation to their outer context in a certain developmental way, such that if you tried to disassemble a living being and put it back together, it would never work. It would never be possible. So nature is complicated. Nature is complex, but our maps can at best be complicated. So there's a disconnect there. And these maps they highlight certain paths for us, which is good and bad. So there are other potential paths that end up being hidden or obscured or just inconceivable to us if we rely on one map too much. So advocates of one integrative meta theory tend to want to subsume all other theories into their own, which is problematic. Now, this is not always the case, but you do sometimes end up with this phenomenon where those that are very well versed in a certain integrative meta theory or unification meta theory, whatever it happens to be, that they might just tend to want to subsume other sophisticated systems into their own. So it ends up sometimes being like one integrative meta theory or one big picture theory of everything to rule them all. So while it can be useful to further integrate and unify these large-scale models, this can also sometimes eliminate much of the nuance and depth that one meta theory has in its own right. And this can also lead to competition, and competition in the face of global challenges won't work. If we don't cooperate, we all lose. And communication and coordination gaps among researchers and activists hinder our progress toward addressing the greatest challenges of our time. The intellectual landscape is fragmented, hyper-specialized, often with hair-splitting nuance and the narcissism of small differences being some of the most powerful factors driving mainstream academic work, and divergent sets of terminologies for apparently similar phenomena. So these big picture frameworks often are not accepted as well by mainstream academic institutions, but some of these pathologies kind of apply as well. They are nonetheless often seem to be incompatible with each other, and we do need a better way to bridge these divides. So how archdisciplinarity research and arch theories can be used to address the meta crisis. We need a range of integrative meta theories, and we need the ability to use them as tools as we work to assess the problem space and potential solution space of our greatest challenges. We need to be able to coordinate across a range of integrative metatheories that we have in our toolkit. Practical applications of metatheories can be complex in a complex world, and they might draw from more than one of these large-scale models in order to try to solve problems. We also often need to create new integrations that bring together aspects of existing metatheories, so that should happen sometimes. Sometimes new unification metatheories will need to be created, and other times multiple unification metatheories can coexist. They don't have to all be, seen as in some sort of hierarchy to each other. Through archdisciplinarity, we might be able to find universal patterns or arches that hold across all integrative or unification metatheories. And the Foundations of Archdisciplinarity paper has identified a few already, and that's some of the work that we are doing. Not me so far, but that ARC is doing. So like, just for example, like a developmental or evolutionary perspective on a range of phenomena, all phenomena perhaps large and small. So that's just one possible arch, and gets into even more details than that. These arches could be used to help facilitate communication across any fields of study and any discipline that could facilitate translation across metatheories. These could even be used to facilitate coordination across interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research projects and on-the-ground projects that make use of this research. All right, so how ARC can help address our greatest challenges. ARC works to, and pretty much all of what I'm going to be saying here comes directly from that paper or the website. I just pretty much copy-pasted. ARC works to create work between big picture frameworks that synthesize everything humanity has learned about ourselves, the world, and the universe. And ARC applies this knowledge for the greater good. ARC takes a neutral, non-denominational approach to the diversity of big picture frameworks and partners with those who want to make a better world. So that includes boots on the ground, hands in the dirt, practical application projects, and these can be partners toward shared goals. ARC focuses more on cooperative analysis and joint cooperation, and less on critical analysis. Where critical analysis is warranted, ARC advocates for constructive criticism toward helping big picture frameworks become more stable and reliable. And where arches turn out to be universal pattern laws of cognition and nature, ARC has a good reason to believe that these would yield new means of understand, predict, and operate on local to global systems in a way that has never been achieved. This new understanding can vastly improve our ability to symmetrically represent ourselves, the world, the universe, and to amplify the scope, breadth, and depth of our precision and success toward finding and implementing real solutions to make a better world. Okay. So in summary, there are multiple theories of everything, and they can be complementary to each other. The complexity of the meta crisis is more than even the most detailed and comprehensive unification meta theories can handle. But Archdisciplinary allows us to coordinate across these meta theories without simplifying them, and holds the potential to identify universal patterns or arcs. An arc is well positioned to build bridges across intellectual communities and help address the meta crisis through its research and practice. All right, well, thank you guys very much. This presentation was done through the Enlightened Worldview Project in alliance with ARC. And if anyone wants to send me an email, that's my email address. And I suppose I will stop the share.
Wow.
And
I didn't mean to cut you off. That was awesome. Thank you so much, Brandon. That was great.
I was done anyways. So
okay, yeah. I hope so. Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off. Well, wow, great. Let's open it up for any questions. Feel free to use the reaction button, raise your hand. If anything's coming up for anyone. I guess I'll just opine that yeah, I thought that did a really great job showing how showing the importance of being able to apply these big picture frameworks to big picture problems, and in terms of kind of just distilling that argument very clearly and presenting that as I'm glad that exists now for people to see and get a sense of. Yeah, anyone have any questions? I see Corey. Go ahead, take it away, Corey.
Yeah, that was very well done. Very, very well done. So I just wanted to, I guess, less a question and more of just a comment for conversation. Yeah, you had talked about like big picture frameworks subsuming other big picture frameworks. I just wanted to say some things on that, kind of carry that forward. Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about in the foundations paper was on different kinds of complexity. And so some of the fundamental properties that in which complexity happens is that you have horizontal, vertical, diagonal complexity. So horizontal complexity are things that exist at a particular level or building block of things, whether we're talking about architectures or processes. And then there's also vertical complexity. So vertical complexity, of course, is stacking. So you coordinate things at a certain horizontal level, and then you get a higher order of complexity. But there's also diagonal complexity. And diagonal complexity is when the outcome or output of one particular entity or action system is the input of another. And it doesn't have to necessarily go vertically. So a lot of people who have arguments against stage theory will usually say something like, well, not everything goes vertical, right? Like things can be messy, things can have loops. And so that's what diagonal complexity counts for, is that the output of one process or architecture can be the input of another at a different magnitude of complexity. So the reason I'm bringing this up is in relation to the subsuming of big picture frameworks into another big picture framework. So I think that there's something to be said positive about a big picture framework looking through itself as a lens at other big picture frameworks and having certain kinds of explanations. But on the other hand, there's this notion, I think, that comes up somewhat frequently, which is that people assume that arch theory and archdisciplinarity is meta theory, and it's not. It's a different kind of a move, and that's what I wanted to sort of make a comment on and clarify about. It would be what I would consider a diagonal complexity. People are taking things that exist at the same approximate scope of complexity, and then they're diagonally filling it back into the same behavioral forms of coordination. And so arch theories would be a different move. It would be coordinating across these big picture frameworks without putting it through the lens of one particular big picture framework that already exists. And it's a new space, and we're still exploring it. So we don't know all the ways that it can happen. But one of the things that we found is a good way of articulating the difference is whether or not an arch theory builds on arches, on universal patterns that hold across these big picture frameworks. And it turns out that a lot of big picture frameworks have universal patterns in them, but there is no way that they had to corroborate the kinds of things that they were talking about unless we zoom out a little bit and then we look across the big picture frameworks without being without necessarily looking through one lens or another to ascertain these arches. So yeah, I guess my comment is around the subsuming, that it's a different move, going from metatheories and unification metatheories to archdisciplinarity in arch theories. And I'll add one more thing to that. This isn't, of course, to try and say that metatheories and unification metatheories are less valuable than archdisciplinarity and arch theories. Actually, arch theory builds on their stability. So what we really want to do is we want to see them be as successful as possible, because it's from their successes that we build. And it's from their successes that we can combine to find more improved syntheses than what any of them offer themselves. And I kind of hesitated there for improved syntheses, but I think I've clarified what I mean in the earlier statements that I made, so nobody misunderstands. So yeah, that was the comment that I wanted to make.
Awesome. Any thoughts or response, Brandon, or we can go to the next question?
Yeah, so I was thinking that. Now, I did actually say taking it to the next level by rather than going meta to go arch. So it's the next level of thought process development, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going meta on that meta. So if you kind of get the gist there, and I was thought it'd be kind of cool to try to popularize that term, go arch, you know. But hopefully I didn't say anything that was, you know, misleading or that I didn't misunderstand, you know, anything.
No, it was perfect. And I'll say, you know, even with myself being the one that coined Archdisciplinarity, and even, you know, being the lead author on that paper / booklet that we wrote, I'm not always the best person to explain things. And, you know, I tend to take a more of like a mechanistic, you know, approach. And so I really appreciate the way that you were able to explain it. It felt more organic, and in some ways it felt more grounded in people's like actual experiences. So yeah, I just really appreciated your presentation. I thought it was really great, complementary to things we've already been doing and talking about.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah. Also very beautiful as well. Really nice graphics. I'll just throw that out there. Mars did have their hand up first, but I don't know. Then they went away and came back. Now I see Brandon first. So I don't know, Mars.
Yes, I am ready. I actually was making some notes.
Sure.
Because I have been working on Metacrisis for a couple of months, and I know Brandon from our Metacrisis chats. Of course, this is a big problem, but there is a phrase by the lead engineer of General Motors that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. I was thinking about the most impactful changes, how to address Metacrisis, and one of them is to restructure unsustainable debt, because interest on debt causes compound interest that in a current economic crisis forces the exponential growth on the finite planet. And in order to cancel debt, it is not a moon mission. It is not a mission to Mars. It is basically a few guys from IMF, World Bank, agreeing that actually it is causing so much destruction. And there is a meme. You mentioned Davos and the World Economic Forum. I actually printed their one of their materials, the global interconnected risk. So Davos is familiar with the term polycrisis. The way how I see the difference between these two terms, polycrisis puts the emphasis on multiple simultaneous crises, while metacrisis puts the emphasis on the one affecting another. So the first step, I mentioned the high pressure point, canceling or restructuring unsustainable debt. I've prepared a second infographic. I'm sorry that the light is reflecting. I call this organization the Planetary Council. You can scan the QR code. It is my initiative, and it all starts from the unifying narrative and sense making, because ultimately every sort of education can be seen as propaganda. And all of these ideas came to me in the past 2-3 months, bouncing with individuals like Brandon. I've started digging into Archdisciplinarity, and honestly, because my energy is limited, I cannot be everywhere. I don't need to dig in every single theory, metatheory, and arch theory. I'm just trying to focus on the simple, most actionable, simple to understand, politically agreeable solution. And I know I've been taking lots of space, but it's really, really, really important. There is also a phrase called moonshot thinking, that it is the guy from Google X, Astro Teller, that made a statement. 10x is easier than 10%. When you aim for 10x, you are uncharted territory, blank page, like blue ocean strategy. There is absolutely no competition because you are doing something revolutionary, paradigm shift. When you do 10%, it is just a nuanced negotiation, business as usual. So I actually like the meme of the Great Reset, because we need to cancel debt, we need to cancel energy subsidies, agricultural subsidies. We need to change the law, for example, the water law. Brandon, you are in North California. There is, water rights in California was made in 1850s, even before the railway. If you have access to river, you can consume as much water as you want. This law is no longer fit for purpose. And I would like to do a great reset, but on our terms. And I am aware that this is a conspiracy theory, but it could be true that whoever, secret government made a situation so bad that the people will ask to implement some of these policies. And I think that whether it is conspiracy theory or not, I actually demand some sort of planetary emergency. And I'm actually hoping that this little content that we've created here, that the few points that I've made will inspire other people to take action. The project is called Planetary Council. I'm zooming in here into a QR code. Please join. Let's continue this conversation offline. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can offer just a little bit of a commentary, just a quick commentary on some of that, because how this seems to relate to the presentation and the work of Archdisciplinarity and ARC is that Mars, you and I actually have been working on the metacrisis.xyz, and essentially trying to incubate some of these projects that are actually trying to do something. Now, we actually have to, in some cases, rely on theoretical frameworks to do that. So I've been trying to work on something that, in trying to understand what projects would be more effective, I found that I could bring in some theory, but more than one theory simultaneously. So that is, I'm looking at the data for how to assess these projects and what maybe if there's could be some sort of an algorithm, some sort of processes through which we could try to convince people that this is worthwhile to fund this project. And I was actually bringing in some of what John Vervaeke was talking about in his presentation to the Consilience Conference about the interdependence and interrelation and mutual interpenetration between the so-called emergence from below and emanation from above. And then I was also looking at the two loops model of sociocultural transitions and evolution there, and some integral theory. I was bringing in some of that, and I was looking at the data. Okay, so how do we coordinate this? So it's a work in progress, you know. So there is a lot of pretty deep theory behind it, and it's in order to try to coordinate this and try to figure out what we're going to do, we need to use archdisciplinarity as a part of that.
Great. Brandon Singletary.
Hey, so I also don't really have much of a question. It's also something of a comment, but towards the end of it, you were describing what archdisciplinarity could be like and how it could solve the problems of that, rather more so the shortcomings of theories of everything and ultimately just meta theories in general. The idea that I had was that it's rather the comparison that I was drawing in my head was what I learned about mathematics recently, and it's something of a universe in its own right. You have a bunch of different mathematical approaches to a bunch of different problems, and all of them are all seemingly compatible with one another on account of them using the exact same formalized language of sorts to map out things and describe reality and the like. And the thing that that archdisciplinarity or arc in general may be trying to look for is a sort of new type of mathematics, not quite in the same way that it exists currently, to map psychological patterns in people. So it's like a psychological mathematics more than anything else, and it's not something that's going to be easily translatable to rather between existing mathematics. I don't know. It just seems like something that that may be of interest, especially since you may be looking for something of an algorithm to sort through theories and the like.
I would suggest that Corey could offer a commentary or answer to this, because you know this better than I do, or Brendan.
Yeah, and it actually ties in with what Mars had brought up earlier. So the idea with arches is that they should hold for any given domain, and they should be present at every scale because they're universal patterns. And so they're complex, but they might also turn out to be having a simple side to them as well. So they might be considered simplex, perhaps. Yeah, so when we're talking about arches, I'll give an example. And then this will relate to what Mars was bringing up in terms of not wanting to have something so overly complicated you can't even operate with it. Universal computability. So universal computability, usually when we hear the term computation, people like to get angry because we're associating people with computers, but that's actually not what I mean. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Actually, computers were based on people trying to understand universal properties of cognition and then find a way to convert that into technology so we could have machines help us do our thinking. And the fundamental properties of computation are that you have units, and then there's some sort of relation between units, and then the relationships form functions, or there's relationships between relationships that forms a system, and then that system becomes a new unit that has a relationship with other units through some kind of operation, and then the relations have relations. It creates another system, and then this creates integrative levels, and integrative levels being another arch. So when we're looking at super complex systems, we can use arches to have a universal sort of a measurement. that we can use to organize our understanding of the thing that we're looking at. And so that would be an example. We're talking about corrupt political systems, that take bribes to write in laws, and then companies go ahead and there's all kinds of ecological disasters. It's really complicated. There's a lot of people who have a lot of stakeholder interests in a lot of different things. How do we work that out? How do we organize our thinking about it? Units. You have individuals who have relationships with other individuals, and then they form systems. And then those systems have relationships with other systems in governments. And then those relationships have relationships with other ones. And then there's, political systems and different parties that have different interests. You can break it down into its components. And you can also do the same thing in relationship to other domains, because now you have a political domain as a unit that's having a relationship with economics is another relationship, which is having a relationship with, the environment itself as a unit, which is composed itself of systems within systems within systems, and then integrative levels. And we can understand properties that exist no matter what building block it is that we're relating, and across building blocks, and how there's upwards and downwards effects. So these sorts of things are, in a way, kind of simple. They are kind of simple, but they can become more complex depending on the circumstance and how many levels of building blocks that we're getting into to understand it. And in regards to Brandon, what you were talking about with mathematics, so I don't want to monologue too much here, but one of the things that I looked at when I did my master's, and also something that I'm continuing on with my PhD dissertation, is that these fundamental properties, these arches, hold across different languages and different meta languages. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about mathematics or metamathematics, or logic or metalogic, or semiotics or metasemiotics, or linguistics or metalinguistics, or chemical biology or metachemical biology. And there is someone who has a language for that, Chandler. They still operate on the same recurring characteristics of there being units that have relations, and then the relations form functions or systems, and then that becomes a higher order unit. But the arches remain. They remain. So when we're talking about building across different languages, it's not just, talking about different languages that people have in these big picture theories of everything, but it's actually embedded all the way down to the actual languages that we use to communicate our ideas, and then the different schemas that we build in terms of what regions of our brains that we're using for sense making. And so, yeah, the general hypothesis, or perhaps a working theory of archdisciplinarity and arch theories, is that that there are arches and they hold across all the different building blocks, and it allows us universal knowledge that we can use to build more improved, more finely grained means of understanding the complexities that we're trying to understand and solve for.
Yeah, I'll just real quickly throw out just two quick thoughts. One is that it's interesting also when we talk about complexity and simplicity, because you get complexity, including nature's complexity, oftentimes just from very simple rules that through iteration kind of create complex emergent phenomena, right? So the initial conditions and sort of the properties that maintain, there can be just a very few set of rules, and then it produces very complex things. Stephen Wolfram's work kind of is a good example of that, is my impression. I will just throw out another, maybe I'll throw out a reflection or / question to Brandon later on, because I see Rosemary, you've got your hand up. Go ahead if you have a question for Brandon or a statement.
I'm looking for some clarification at the Consilience gathering in March. I was there when Corey was giving his presentation. I did manage to get a hold of that paper. And then there was another group toward the end. I don't know whether they're the same people or whether there's two streams or more streams in the consilience gathering that were working on wisdom, a paper on wisdom. So it seems like the Arch people are much more in the mechanistic model, you know, the graphics were very much in that direction, whereas there seems to be an artistic spiritual branch that was also at the consilience meeting that they're going to meet in Bergerac, France. It sounded like, and another reflection is that I did find a real up and down quality to not so much the content, but the people who were presenting. I think everybody's going in the same direction, but I'm wondering about, my question would be, how is the human being who's working with these arches, you know, what is it about humanity, and particularly group humanity, this whole concept of groups of people actually working on something together and using a collective force or field to move everything forward. That's something that I didn't really see in Brandon's slides, but I did note that Leah Anderson and Hansi Freinacht are about developing the human potential to, you know, to be the tools who are going to do all these new things.
Corey, yeah, if you wanted to respond to this.
Yeah, so Archdisciplinarity is a scope. It's a scope. It's not particularly ideological. I mean, you can have like an arch theory about something that could be true. And of course, you know, we want to aim towards understanding the laws of nature. But I think it's a good point you bring up, and it's something that I've thought about, but maybe not in the same way. But it's, you know, has overlapping, some overlapping concepts here. So I think for me, part of it is like trying to compensate for what's missing. You know, like, what do we really need that's missing? And of course, you know, you're talking about like the creative, you know, artistic side of things, and you know, collective intelligence, like bringing people together to actually do something performatively. And I totally agree with all those things, and we actually have some things in the works that I probably shouldn't talk about yet, but maybe you and I can, you know, talk about it off the video here. But one of the things that was just really missing was that there wasn't a formalization of language to describe the space, and a platform for the you know, precision in, you know, the intellectual pursuit of it. And so that we have sort of placed a lot of emphasis on that earlier on. And there's an omittance of the artistic and creative, and then also the collective intelligence sort of thing. An omittance of that isn't that we haven't thought about it. It's simply we haven't gotten there yet. And also, I think a lot of what is in that space is up to everybody to formalize together. You know, Archdisciplinarity isn't owned by Arc. You know, the idea isn't trademarked by us, you know, and so we encourage people to dream up what the future could be, and then we can share in that dream. I like to say, you know, in some sense, reality is shared imagination, right? So does that kind of answer your question? Kinda.
Glad to know that you're aware, you know, of all of these, shall we say, presences that are around us that we haven't seen yet, but they're just sitting there waiting for us to tap them.
And Rosemary, that group that you mentioned, meeting in Bergerac, France, is the Respond Network. It's also dealing with the meta crisis and the sort of part of the broader liminal meta-modern ecosystem of folks engaging these issues. I just wanted to name that for people who are interested in that project. Very cool stuff happening there. Okay, are we any more on that, or we'll go to Robert? Go ahead, Robert.
Thanks. So yeah, I thought I'd just give a simple example of why I got involved with any of this stuff at all. So, I mean, basically, let's dial back 12 months ago. I was just trying to solve some wicked social issues in a workplace context and realized that standard social science disciplines weren't going to get it done because the problems were too intersectional and too multidimensional and just wasn't happening. So, and I hadn't really bothered reading anything other than computer science for 20 years. So I started like just ripping books off the shelf on complexity theory and any kind of bigger picture kinds of frameworks. One thing led to another. And the reason I got into Archdisciplinarity was because my bookshelf was getting too cluttered with too many flavors of metamodernism. And so I needed an organizing principle for basically, do you do it alphabetical or by page count, or it's just basic librarianship, among other things, is how do you kind of connect the dots on all this stuff. So I mean, basically like really super pragmatic stuff. And then Corey is generously given me a lot of bandwidth lately, and sampling a variety of meta-modern frameworks, I came up with the conclusion that's somewhat unremarkable that a good high-level framework is actually an energy-saving device because it just makes it easier to deal with mass complexity without having your own head in chaos 24/7. So, I mean, and Rosemary, to your point, I have absolutely zero ambition to write the one meta theory to rule them all. The 10,000 page textbook that everyone must read, from now until forever. I could care less, because exactly what you said, I think there's big slices of reality that are nonverbal anyway. And, so I have a love-hate relationship with the printed word. Let's put it that way. At that point, I think I'll rest my case.
Awesome, thanks. Any reflections or responses or thoughts, Brandon Norgaard?
Well, yeah, so let me get back to the wisdom thing. And we were looking at a lot of different consilience, obviously in that consilience conference, we were looking at different themes. Metamodern spirituality was one, wisdom. I did one on enlightenment and various others. Yeah, Neoplatonism. And the way I guess I see it is that those sort of things, those sort of theories or frameworks or approaches would be kind of more foregrounded than the Archdisciplinarity. So it's like Archdisciplinarity is something that wouldn't make sense unless it was in the context of looking at these different frameworks that are already doing something, and that in order to have that coordination and that ability to have better coordination and have a deeper consilience, and having the ability to actually take that theory into practice at a more effective way is where Archdisciplinarity would come into play. Does that sound about right, Corey? How would you
Yeah. I think one of the things that we sort of done to an extent early on is, um, we put together that unification metatheory table, which is about helping people locate what kinds of big picture frameworks are going to be useful for the different kinds of things that people are interested in. And then this goes back to Robert and I and some conversations that we're having, because he's bouncing a lot of different big picture frameworks, and then we're kind of talking about them in relationship to his topics. But I think that's a big part of it, is like helping people be able to actually find what it is that can help with whatever it is that they're working on. And in some cases, there's already a metatheory or a unification metatheory that solves that particular task. And then in other cases, no. So we have to look across frameworks and get what we can glean from them, and then maybe build something new. And sometimes that's going to be meta-theoretical, and sometimes it's going to be arch-theoretical. So yeah.
Let me just give an example of like practical stuff that I'm working on and how it plays against Arch stuff. So I read the Archdisciplinary paper, Brandon, the one that you were kind of sampling. And by the way, great summary. I mean, that's not an easy lift. Okay. So yeah, hopefully there's a recording of this, so I will never have to try to give that 30-minute talk personally. I'd much rather play yours. But so I'm reading that paper and I'm into Corey's stuff, and I'm starting to think, good God, the Church-Turing thesis, Gödel's theorem, Tarski, symbolic logic, universal computability. What in the world is going on here, and how does that apply to anything? This is just like really over the top. That was my original gut response. Okay. Then, however, one thing led to another, and now I'm starting to write stuff on, is ChatGPT really racist, and how would we know? And it turns out, although all that logical formalism seems basically, Rosemary, for reasons you brought up, it seems not quite spot on for how human brains work, but it seems super spot on for how artificial brains work. Okay, so if you want to get into an operational definition of racist AI, for example, you kind of need that full dress mathematics that Corey's bringing to the table. So I'm finding that the Archdisciplinary framework actually enables my more domain-specific analysis of basically the ethics of AI, which in my particular life world is a fairly up close and personal topic. Enough said about that. I mean, take me on a side conversation if you want more about what's going on with that. But anyway, just to toss out this whole thing that Archdisciplinary doesn't just always mean going more abstract and bigger. It's more like, from the architectural standpoint, you can go from that big down into whatever it is you're dealing with, and maybe with a new kind of clarity that you otherwise wouldn't have had.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that was well said. Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
This also goes back to Rosemary's comment earlier. So I think part of the work that we have to do is to find ways to bring this down to the ground, because it does get really heady and it does get really technical. And in general, with the general population, people aren't really interested in going that in depth to understand things. So I think that there are certain cases where we can employ this sort of higher level, more complex, sensibility in regards to working on different topics, and we can do really good work. But also, I think about Ken Wilber, and he has that framework of choral, kind of a quasi framework about choral. And then, Michael Lamport Commons has like meta, cross paradigmatic, and the ultra stage that he refers to it. and they both kind of have some commonalities in how they describe the space, which is that generally when people get into this coordination space, there's a realization that we have to actually adapt. We have to like find where people are at and then fit it to that particular sensibility of sense making. Because if we're unable to do that, then we're not going to be able to communicate important ideas in places that need to be having understanding about it, or conveying it in a way that is interpretable to people. And so I think that there is some sort of I think there's a really big need for us to find ways to bring this down out of the clouds into everyday life, in a way that fits general people's sense making. And I think like for that, one of the things I'm really interested in is understanding the methodology for how to do it. Something that's not so overly complicated that I have to spend, 5 hours trying to work something out, but something that's more intuitive, that I can apply in real world cases as I'm talking to anybody. And I think something like that would be really useful across, whether you want to lay things out, as a rhizome and flatten, people just have different skills. Or if you want to talk about like vertical, in terms of people being at different orders of complexity, like I think both are useful ways of framing it, being able to work across all that space. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well said. Brandon, any thoughts? Or I can also, I had one of the things that that you named in this presentation, which I think is important, which is a way that I look at the grounding issue that we're kind of speaking to here, as sort of how do we bring this down to earth in a meaningful way. And for me, the urgency of the big picture problems that we're facing is sort of the immediate way of doing that. So to use an example, I live in Vermont, and over the past 48 hours, there's some really intense flooding here, 1 in 1,000-year flooding. And the capital, Vermont, is still underwater. But now, obviously, well, I'll come back to the broader significance of this, but just even in my local property here, watching the water accrue and then float and then move sort of across the landscape, and thinking, it kind of occurred to me once kind of the quote unquote dust had settled, more about all the implications of what that event meant. It wasn't just water flowing downhill. It also was picking up all the things that it was going through. It was basically affecting the landscape and the ecosystem in a very intense, profound way. And it all kind of came together and flowed together and had this big impact in a way that had such a unfathomable degree of relationality going on in terms of all these things being swept up and moved along and leaving an incredible impact, that it kind of just made me think for a moment of how little we consider the relationality of things most of the time. And how an event like that can kind of just literally kind of stream all of that into the same place suddenly, so that you realize all of the impacts everywhere that are going on. So for example, if a place floods, we might think, oh, it'll go back to normal, but we don't think about all of the oil and all of the cemeteries and whatever else that gets affected by an event like that, the toxins that get taken out and all these sorts of things, right? Now, this might sound very abstract, right? But this is the whole point, is that our minds just don't really go to that framing. We focus on very particular things. And then suddenly we start seeing microplastics showing up in the Arctic, and we didn't think, oh, like what I do in my own, dish or washing machine, follows through this complex related path of networks that will ultimately lead to this being the outcome. And so my point is that if we aren't expanding our scope of inquiry and thought to be able to entertain these sorts of hyper objects and very complex phenomena, then we're not able to diagnose the problem or begin to ameliorate it. And so being able to think in more kind of complex fashion and being able to widen our scope is precisely the toolkit that we need to be able to address these problems, which I'm more or less, I think, kind of restating, Brandon, really the point that you very succinctly were getting at. And so I guess I'll just frame that as a question of what do you think then is the role that education plays in addressing the meta crisis and being able to bring in these big picture frameworks into pedagogy and being able to maybe approach the educational system with a mindset of our problems are this big now, so we need thinking that's this big now, and we need to build that into our education institutions. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or go ahead.
Well,
Yes, and I'm sorry.
go ahead, Brandon, you're on.
Oh, were you asking? Anyways, I'll just offer some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I was asking you, Brandon. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the educational institutions that we have now are very much legacy based. As Zach Stein makes a good case for this, explaining, okay, so, and that it's almost like a mechanistic assembly line of what, okay, so we have children and adolescents, and then we bring them along this conveyor belt, and then they're done. So it's a lifelong arc, is what we need to think of it. We need to get outside of the thinking in terms of these legacy institutions that we have. So there needs to be an integration across not only the disciplines, because these institutions want to separate. Okay, you're doing math now, you're doing reading now, you're doing social studies now. So those need to actually be integrated, and it also needs to be integrated with life, integrated with nature, integrated with the context of where you are. And these need to be adaptable. So we have this tendency to develop certain cultural forms, and then they get kind of locked in place, and we think that these have to be a certain way, like this is the only way that things could be and ever have been, which is obviously not true. If we look at history, we can always see the developments of these, and a lot of times it's a frozen accident that served a purpose at one time, but that, if we have this greater consciousness and this courage and this recognition of the moment we're in, we should be able to evolve our institutions and our cultural forms, our expectations of what is possible and what is necessary according to what works in our time, which is a quite different time than when these educational systems were created. I remember, when I was young, that was the thinking. Okay, so I need to learn here. I gotta go to school for whatever grade, this grade, and this grade, and then eventually college, and then eventually you're done, right? And that's not true. That's not true. We need actually to continue learning with each other together throughout our lives, and otherwise, the people who are adult citizens who are supposed to be stewards of our democracy in our world, and the people who are supposed to be parents to our children are not capable of doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Well put, Brandon. I just wanted to insert that I'm a very in the weeds education practitioner. I mean, that's my meat and potatoes. That's what they pay me for. That's what I do. They pay me for it, and I volunteer for twice as much beyond what they pay me for. So that's just my area of practice. And so my whole interest in meta theory is educational transformation. So like if you want to catalog the pathologies of education, Zach Stein writes some cool books, so read those. But I'm more like Mr. Fix-It. I'm trying to figure out how to really, Brandon's right, it's totally obsolete, but and my school in particular is showing the wear and tear badly. It didn't go through COVID terribly well. But anyway, on the solution side, Lenny, Rachel Anderson, and I have kind of shaken hands virtually on a study circle in the fall on her work in relation to Paulo Freire, which I'm bringing the Paulo Freire flavor. And so what I'm really doing is kind of taking Lenny's paper on the Bildung rows, and I'm using that as kind of my initial slide. And then I'm just like arc theorizing that sucker to the nth degree and mashing it up with everybody's everything. And I'm trying to get a really hardcore kind of complexity theory take on Lenny's model, so I can operationalize that thing. And I'm talking about not just in Denmark, where everybody's happy and friendly and nice. I'm talking about it in the mean streets of the US of A and other neighborhoods around the world where global Bildung and, you know, having well-rounded community-minded education isn't like top of mind. So it's an interesting challenge problem. But I think like the Bildung rows in my mind is just the easiest way to express well-rounded education for the 21st century. There used to be all kinds of other models of well-rounded education. That's supposedly what the liberal arts programs were supposed to be about. The problem is liberal arts has kind of lost any sense of coherence, you know, to the point that if you spend $100,000 on a liberal arts degree at the bachelor's level, what do you really end up with at the end of the day? You know, and that's an issue, you know, cost being a huge part of that issue, time efficiency, you know, the whole disciplinary thing maybe isn't serving us as well as it used to. That being said, I'm not so sure disciplines are dispensable either. You know what I mean? I'm not so sure that you can go straight to archdisciplinarity bypassing disciplines. You know, so I was joking with Greg Enriquez in his channel the other day that I want to teach people enough K knowledge that his UT has something to do. Namely, you can't have a unified theory of knowledge until you've got some knowledge in the first place. Which is a super important problem for today's education, because, you know, what I've learned lately is I can't assume my students have any prerequisites at all. So, you know, somehow or another, we're trying to generate this sort of extreme global complexity view of the world, but you've got to bootstrap it from some fairly foundational things. So I'll just leave it there. Obviously, this is a huge deal, but if anybody's like wants to get into the practical side of this stuff, message me and we'll go there, because that's where I live.
Cool. Yeah. Also, I'm glad you brought up the UTalk framework, because that itself can be a very helpful sort of meta theory to clarify the nature of the humanities and the sciences in a way that, if they have sort of lost their way, could be really helpful. So there's always this sort of these really big problems do require very broad level approaches theoretically to consider solutions, and so in many ways that's what they offer. We're getting towards the end of our time together, but I do see a couple more hands. So Corey, go ahead. You were first, then we'll go to Mars, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just wanted to add to this topic of the meta crisis again. Vervaeke has like the sort of top-down, bottom-up framework about integrative levels. I think he just refers to them as levels, but nonetheless, it's, I think, emergence and emanation is the terms that he uses for it. And Robert, I'm sure you can recall in that thread where you and I were having a conversation, as I was talking about, like, you can either, in trying to transform a system, and of course there are a lot of other things to bring into the conversation, so this is just like one thing to talk about in relationship to it, one slice of the pie, so to say. One can try and guide the evolution or development of the construction of new ideas in individuals, which doesn't necessarily have to direct what they think, but stepping people through the process of constructing new ideas themselves. And that can be an individual, and it can be, co-created among participants. Or it means you have to have a top-down coordination to make a change. And in those kinds of cases, it means that people wouldn't necessarily make a decision on themselves and build an idea themselves, but they may find a particular a particular offer to be more lucrative than another case. So, for example, people who have money invested in coal, if you make it more financially beneficial for people who run companies or to invest in clean energy, and they can make a lot more money doing it, then people are going to follow the money. They're going to go where they can make more. And so, I think just making a reference to Vervaeke and that top-down, bottom-up emergence and emanation framework is fairly useful. And then one last thing, I think like associative arts degrees in general are they're kind of a little bit transdisciplinary in a way, because students take a lot of generals and then they get some expertise in a lot of different areas of learning. One thing that I would really like to do if I had limitless resources would be to open some sort of associative arts program that is organized around transdisciplinary thinking. So right in the door, they have frameworks they can use to organize everything that they're learning and fit it together as part of their program. Usually there aren't like theses that people write when they do associative arts. I don't think we get there until bachelor's, but it would be cool to maybe have something like that in associative arts, like, well, write like a 20-page paper on how you kind of fit together everything you've learned, sort of thing. So I'll leave it there so we still have time for Mars.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mars. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Apologies. I am a big believer in education. As one of the solutions to meta crisis, I was thinking about a global education curriculum and using a technology similar to one laptop per child. I think that the cost of producing a simple device that has a basic access to the internet is in the region of $10 US. This is the market price for a basic phone in the UK. And then we can debate whether we use Starlink, and there is a one hub per village where every child has a personalized AI tutor on the device, because, hey, we cannot scale teachers, we cannot scale schools, but $10 for a child that is able to read and knows the numbers. And then there was a question whether teaching English is imperialistic neo-colonialism, and what about a second order effect of women walking for water, but we can replace social aspect of walking for water with social aspect of education. So this concept of a global education curriculum is one of these many big impactful solutions. And the second comment is about bottom up or top down. And I think that right now, in this moment in the history of humanity, both of these approaches are converging. We need to have some grassroots bottom up momentum, as well as existing structures of power, existing leaders realizing that, the current model of democracy didn't update since ancient Greece, since founding fathers of the US in 1776. And I actually believe that a radical change is possible. I've explained moonshot thinking, that uncharted waters, unlimited possibilities. And I was actually thinking about this, I call it singularity activation. What will be the impactful moment where entire humanity is on a single page. Maybe the peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia. That will be a big event, newsworthy, that will capture attention of the entire world. So then we have the president of Ukraine, president of Russia. We will get the president of China, Xi, Prime Minister of India, Modi, the royal family from the UK, the US presidents. We will get entire world on a single page. And again, this is a big pressure point. We can use the power of a big tech. Elon with Twitter, Zuckerberg with Facebook. We'll get TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, Apple, Amazon, every single will just unify the humanity. And I think it is possible. If I can explain it in simple words in English, in like 2 sentences, it is possible. So apologies, I'm not studying yet another meta theory on top of another integrative arches. I actually know enough right now to realize, to show optimistic vision, showing that the change is possible. And when I have more time, I will dig deeper into all these arches. Right now, I'm just presenting some actionable solutions, some impactful ideas, and I hope that it will inspire in some way. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Mars. And thanks, Brandon. Really appreciate your presentation, and appreciate you taking the time today. I'll give you the last word, and then we'll close up. But thanks again so much, and thanks everyone for coming out. But go ahead, Brandon.
Yes, and thank you very much, Brandon and Corey, for the invitation. And I want to say that there are ongoing projects and efforts to use not only these unification metatheories and big pictures theory of everything to address the meta crisis. We have these ongoing efforts, and we are using, with ARC, this effort to use this new concept of archdisciplinarity as well. And for a lot of this, we need resources. We need collaborators. We need other kinds of financial resources. So that is an ongoing effort of fundraising to actually have this impact. And I'm along with several of the others here on this call and who weren't able to make it. We're working on that, and we are hoping to connect with more people to help make that a reality.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again, Brandon. Really appreciate it. So stay tuned for our next salons, which will be posted soon when they happen. In the meantime, though, have a wonderful day. Take care.